Welcome to Shanghai, the City of Lights, a metropolis where ancient tradition collides with ultra-modern ambition, where gleaming skyscrapers pierce the clouds and neon signs illuminate the night. 28 million people call this place home, making it one of the largest cities on Earth. But beneath the glittering facade of this economic powerhouse lies something else entirely, something darker. Shanghai is a city that never sleeps, but perhaps it should. Because when night falls and the crowds thin, when the business districts empty and the ancient neighborhoods grow quiet, the shadows begin to move. The city's colonial past whispers through abandoned villas. Phantom footsteps echo in empty metro stations. And in certain buildings, doors that should remain closed swing open on their own. This is not the Shanghai you see in travel brochures. This is not the story of economic miracles and architectural wonders. This is the story of what happens when a city grows too fast, when it buries its past beneath concrete and steel without ever truly letting go. This is the story of Shanghai's ghosts. Today, we're going to explore the haunted buildings that locals refuse to enter. We'll investigate urban legends so persistent that they forced metro stations to hire paranormal specialists. And we'll examine mysterious disappearances that have never been explained, cases that official records seem eager to forget. So ask yourself, what shadows hide behind the city that never sleeps? What secrets lurk in the spaces between the old and new? And most importantly, are you brave enough to look? To understand Shanghai's haunted reputation, we need to go back in time. Back to the 1920s and 1930s, when this city was known as the Paris of the East. During these decades, Shanghai was divided into foreign concessions, carved up by British, French, and American interests. The city became a playground for the wealthy and powerful, a place where fortunes were made overnight and lost just as quickly. The architectural legacy of this era still stands today. French-style villas line tree-covered streets in the former French concession. British colonial buildings dominate the Bund, that famous waterfront promenade. Art Deco masterpieces from the 1930s rise like monuments to a bygone era. But many of these beautiful buildings carry dark histories, stories of violence, betrayal, and unexplained phenomena that continue to this day. The French concession villas. Walk through the former French concession today, and you'll see some of Shanghai's most desirable real estate. Wealthy Chinese families and expatriates pay premium prices for apartments in these historic buildings. But ask the locals, the people who've lived here for generations, and they'll tell you different stories. There are houses on certain streets where strange things happen. Lights turn on and off without anyone touching the switches. Doors slam shut with no wind to move them. Residents hear footsteps in empty rooms above them, only to discover that no one lives upstairs. Some buildings have a reputation for driving people away. Tenants move in with excitement, then leave within months, refusing to explain why. Real estate agents know which properties to avoid, which buildings carry reputations that make them impossible to sell. One such building stands on what was once Route Ferguson, a street that ran through the heart of the French concession. The villa itself is unremarkable from the outside, a three-story structure with the typical French colonial architecture of the era. But tenants have reported inexplicable phenomena for decades. Windows that closed at night stand open in the morning. Cold spots appear in certain rooms even during summer. And at night, people see figures moving past windows, silhouettes of people who shouldn't be there. A student who rented an apartment in one of these buildings in the early 2000s reported waking up repeatedly at exactly 3 in the morning. Each time, she felt a presence in the room, a sense of being watched. She would lie frozen in bed, unable to move, hearing what sounded like whispering just beyond her comprehension. After 3 weeks, she moved out. She wasn't the last tenant to leave unexpectedly. The hotels that remember. Shanghai's historic hotels have their own stories. During the colonial era, These establishments were the epicenters of Shanghai's glittering nightlife. Businessmen made deals over cocktails. Socialites danced until dawn. But they also saw their share of tragedy. Suicides, murders, accidents that were perhaps not accidents at all. Hotel staff, people who work night shifts and see these buildings when they're quiet and empty, have their own collection of experiences. Security guards report seeing guests in hallways that are closed for renovation. Cleaners enter rooms that are empty, only to find the bed mussed, as if someone had just been sleeping there. Front desk clerks receive calls from room numbers that don't exist. One former hotel employee, who worked at a historic establishment on the Bund, described entering a supposedly empty guest room and finding the bathroom mirror fogged with steam, as if someone had just taken a hot shower. The faucet was dry and cold. No one had been assigned to that room in weeks. The Wukong Mansion. Perhaps no building embodies Shanghai's haunted reputation more than the Wukong Mansion. This striking red brick building stands at the intersection of Wukong Road and Huaihai Road, its distinctive ship-like shape making it one of Shanghai's most photographed landmarks. Built in 1924, it was originally called the Normandy Apartments, designed by a Hungarian architect for French residents. But the Wukong Mansion's beauty hides a darker history. During the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s and 1970s, this building became infamous for another reason. Multiple people threw themselves from its roof, choosing death over the persecution they faced. The building became so associated with suicide that locals began calling it the diving board, a nickname that still makes longtime residents uncomfortable. The most famous victim was Shengguan Yunzhu, a beloved actress from the 1940s, whose films were later denounced as poisonous weeds by the communist government. Facing relentless persecution, she took her own life. To this day, some claim they can smell her perfume outside her former apartment door. Others report hearing a thumping sound on the ground below when her bedroom window inexplicably slides open on its own. But the ghostly activity at Wukong Mansion doesn't stop there. Artists and intellectuals who lived in the building during various periods have also been reported as restless spirits. Residents claim to see shadowy figures moving through hallways. Elevators stop at floors where no one pressed the button. And at night, from certain apartments, people hear the faint sound of sobbing. The Qiyu Mansion, where phantom animals attack. If you want to understand how deeply Shanghai's ghost stories have penetrated local consciousness, look no further than the Qiyu Mansion. This story begins with two brothers, migrants who came to Shanghai seeking their fortune. After World War I ended, they discovered a warehouse full of paint. With the price of paint skyrocketing during the post-war reconstruction, the Qiyu brothers became millionaires overnight. But the Qiyu brothers weren't interested in quiet respectability. They built two identical mansions next to each other and filled their grounds with exotic animals. Burmese tigers prowled the gardens. Crocodiles lurked in decorative pools. Peacocks wandered the grounds. The mansions became legendary, symbols of Shanghai's excess and eccentricity. Then, without warning, both brothers disappeared. No explanation. No goodbye. No heir to inherit their fortune. The mansions fell into ruin, the animals died, and the buildings stood empty. What happened next is where the story enters legend. When developers attempted to renovate one of the mansions, construction workers began experiencing strange phenomena. Multiple workers reported being attacked by invisible animals. They would suddenly feel teeth and claws tearing at their skin, but when they looked around, nothing was there. These weren't minor injuries either. Workers required hospital treatment for bite marks and lacerations that appeared without any visible cause. One woman reported seeing a dragon-like creature on a construction crane. Another worker attempted to attack his boss with a hammer, later claiming that a lizard-like creature had forced his hand, controlling his movements. The construction stopped. To this day, one of the mansions remains in ruins, Though some say they've seen workers moving around inside, brave souls or fools depending on your perspective. Night guards at the Four Seasons Hotel across the street report seeing animals that shouldn't exist moving through the abandoned grounds. Shadows with shapes that don't match any living creature. Strange sounds echo from the empty building. And sometimes, just sometimes, people claim to hear the roar of tigers that died decades ago. Shanghai's metro system is one of the most extensive in the world, moving millions of passengers every day. But beneath the efficiency and modernity, beneath the gleaming tiles and digital displays, some stations have reputations that make even locals nervous. Jing'an Metro Station Line 2, the security camera incident. The Jing'an Metro Station on Line 2 looks like any other stop on Shanghai's sprawling metro network. Commuters pass through it every day on their way to work, never knowing what supposedly happened here back in 2003, shortly after the station opened. Workers and passengers began reporting strange experiences almost immediately. Unexplained noises echoed through the tunnels. People felt inexplicably uneasy, that creeping sensation of being watched. Some claimed to see things moving in their peripheral vision, shadows that vanished when looked at directly. Something wasn't right in Jing'an Metro Station, but no one could explain what. Then came the incident that would cement the station's haunted reputation forever. Late one night, a security guard sat in his office, monitoring the station's security cameras. The platform was nearly empty, just a single girl waiting for a late train. What happened next, according to urban legend, was captured entirely on camera. A spectral apparition descended onto the platform. The guard watched in horror as this phantom figure approached the waiting girl. Then, in an act of violence that defied explanation, the apparition reached into the girl's chest and pulled out her heart. The guard watched as the ghost dragged the girl's lifeless body down the platform by her hair, leaving a trail that shouldn't exist. The sight was so ghastly that the guard fainted. When he regained consciousness, he raised the alarm, called the police, and searched frantically for evidence of what he'd witnessed. But they found nothing. No body, no blood, no evidence that the girl had ever existed. And the ghost, of course, had vanished completely. What makes this story particularly chilling is what happened next. According to persistent rumors, the metro station hired paranormal specialists to cleanse the station of whatever evil presence lurked there. Can you imagine? A modern metro station, built with cutting-edge technology, requiring spiritual intervention. Since that cleansing, no other major incidents have been reported at Jing'an Station on Line 2. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn. Some versions of this legend claim that the security footage was confiscated and classified at the highest levels of government, that the video still exists somewhere, locked away in a vault, showing something that officially never happened. Whether this is true or simply the natural evolution of an urban legend, no one can say for certain. Kadobo Road Metro Station, the ghost station. If Jing'an Station is famous for one spectacular incident, Kadobo Road Station on Line 1 has earned its haunted reputation through decades of accumulated strangeness. Locals call it the ghost station, and many people who work nearby will take alternative routes rather than pass through it. The problem started with the station's location. It was built near a graveyard, and from a traditional Chinese perspective, the feng shui was absolutely terrible. In Chinese belief systems, feng shui isn't just about interior decorating or business luck. It's about the fundamental flow of energy through a space, and when that energy is blocked or corrupted, bad things happen. Kaobao Road Station has been plagued by violent accidents with alarming frequency. Trains break down for no apparent reason. Power failures occur more often than at other stations. And the staff, the people who work there every day, have their own collection of experiences that they share reluctantly, if at all. Multiple employees have reported bumping into people in dark tunnels, only to turn around and find no one there. They hear laughter echoing through empty passages, the sound bouncing off tiles in ways that make it impossible to determine the source. One passenger reported hearing someone calling for help further down the train. When several people went to investigate, they found the cars completely empty. No one could explain where the voice had come from. The station has a presence, workers say, an atmosphere that's hard to describe but impossible to ignore. It's the feeling of being watched when you're alone. It's the cold spots that appear without explanation. It's the sense that something is wrong, fundamentally wrong, with this particular place. Longhua Temple in the Massacre Graveyard. Not far from Shanghai's metro system lies Longhua Temple, one of the city's oldest and most significant Buddhist temples. The temple itself dates back over 1,000 years and is named after a mythological dragon that supposedly once occupied the grounds. But it's not the dragon that gives this place its haunted reputation. In 1927, Shanghai was a powder keg of political tension. Chiang Kai-shek, leader of the nationalist government, decided to eliminate his communist rivals once and for all. He worked with local gangsters, including the infamous Du Yusheng, to round up suspected communists and sympathizers. The executions that followed were brutal and swift. More than 5,000 people are believed to have been killed in this purge. Many of them were executed near Longhua Temple, their bodies buried in mass graves that have never been fully excavated or acknowledged. While some prominent communists like Zhou Enlai managed to escape, the vast majority were not so lucky. Today, the area around Longhua Temple is said to be extraordinarily active with paranormal phenomena. Visitors report seeing figures in outdated clothing walking through the grounds, only to vanish when approached. Some hear the sounds of crying or screaming coming from empty areas. Temple monks perform regular rituals to calm the restless spirits, acknowledging what history has tried to forget. During certain times of year, particularly around the anniversary of the massacre, locals avoid the area after dark. Those who've been there speak of an oppressive atmosphere, a weight in the air that makes it difficult to breathe. The temple itself remains a place of worship and peace, but just beyond its walls, the ghosts of history refuse to rest. The Normandy and the diving board. We mentioned the Normandy earlier, the building now known as Wukong Mansion. But its story deserves deeper examination because it represents something fundamental about Shanghai's relationship with its ghosts. This isn't just a story about one building or one tragedy. It's about how an entire city processes trauma and memory. During the Cultural Revolution, Shanghai's intellectuals and artists were particular targets. The communist government viewed them as corrupting influences, people whose ideas and creativity threatened the party's control. They faced public humiliation, torture, imprisonment, and in many cases, they faced a choice between perpetual suffering and death. The Normandy building, with its distinctive height and accessible roof, became a final destination for many who chose death. The suicides became so frequent that people started calling it the diving board, a darkly humorous nickname that local residents still use despite its grim origins. Shangguan Yunju, the famous actress, is only the most well-known victim. Dozens of others took the same path, and their presence allegedly still lingers. Security guards working night shifts at the building report, seeing windows opening on their own, always on the upper floors. They hear thumping sounds on the pavement below, but when they investigate, they find nothing. Residents of the building, particularly those living on the higher floors, report strange phenomena. The smell of unfamiliar perfume appears and disappears without source. Shadows move in hallways when no one is there. Some apartments seem to have persistent cold spots, rooms that never warm up no matter how high you turn the heat. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Normandy as haunting is the sense of sadness that permeates the building. Multiple residents have described feeling suddenly depressed when entering certain spaces, an overwhelming melancholy that vanishes as soon as they leave. It's as if the building itself holds the emotional residue of those final moments. the despair that drove so many to that fatal choice. Shanghai is built on water. The Huangpu River cuts through its heart, and the city sprawls along the banks of this vital waterway. For centuries, Shanghai's docks were its lifeblood, connecting China to the world through trade and commerce. But the docks have always had another reputation, one that locals speak of in hushed tones. They have a history of making people disappear. The labyrinth of old Shanghai. Before Shanghai became a city of skyscrapers and wide boulevards, it was a labyrinth. Narrow alleyways called Longtang wound between traditional shikumen houses, creating a maze where even locals could get lost. Many of these old neighborhoods still exist, tucked between modern developments, their narrow passages dark even during the day. In the 1980s and 1990s, before widespread mobile phones and security cameras, people would sometimes enter these old neighborhoods and never emerge. Family members would report them missing. Police investigations would turn up nothing. No bodies. No witnesses. No explanation. Some of these disappearances could be explained by crime. Shanghai, despite its modern reputation, has always had criminal elements. Triads operated in the shadows. Human trafficking networks moved people across borders, and debts were sometimes settled with violence. But some disappearances couldn't be explained so easily. Cases where the victim had no known enemies, no reason to run away, and no connections to criminal organizations. One story tells of a woman who went to visit her aunt in an old neighborhood near Hangzhou. She called her husband from her aunt's apartment to say she was leaving and would be home in an hour. She never arrived. Police interviewed the aunt, who confirmed the woman had left around 8 in the evening. Security footage from nearby streets showed her entering the neighborhood, but never leaving. Search teams combed the area. Nothing. 3 days later, her body was found in a boarded-up building 2 blocks from her aunt's apartment. The building had been searched twice already and found empty. The door was still boarded shut from the outside. Medical examiners could find no clear cause of death, no signs of violence or disease. The official explanation was heart failure, but her family never accepted it. How did she get into a sealed building? Why didn't she cry out? And why were there strange marks on her arms that looked like handprints, fingers pressing into her flesh with impossible strength? The docks after dark Shanghai's docks, particularly the older sections that haven't been modernized or turned into tourist attractions, have their own collection of dark stories. Workers who've spent decades loading and unloading ships, men who know these docks like their own homes, will tell you that certain areas should be avoided after sunset. During the 1980s and early 1990s, before modern security systems and comprehensive surveillance, dock workers began reporting strange sightings, shadows that moved against the wind, sounds of footsteps on empty piers, and most disturbing of all, people who appeared and disappeared without explanation. One particular dock, now demolished to make way for a commercial development, was infamous among workers. Multiple men reported seeing the same figure there, a woman in a white dress standing at the edge of the pier, looking out over the water. When workers approached her, concerned she might jump, she would turn to look at them, and they would see that she had no face, just a blank expanse where her features should be. The woman in white became such a persistent presence that workers started refusing shifts at that dock. Supervisors initially dismissed these reports as superstition or pranks, but after several workers quit rather than work there at night, the company quietly reassigned operations. The stories varied in details, but one element remained constant: the woman in white always appearing near the water, always faceless, always vanishing before anyone could reach her. The disappearances of dock workers, but the docks weren't just home to ghost stories. Real people disappeared there with disturbing regularity, and many of these cases remain unsolved. In 1987, a dock worker named Liu Chun finished his shift and told his colleagues he was going home. Security footage showed him leaving through the main gate. but he never arrived at his apartment, and his family never saw him again. His belongings, including his identification and money, were found in his locker the next day. There was no reason for him to disappear. He had a wife and young son. He was planning a promotion. He had no debts and no known enemies. Police investigations initially suspected foul play, perhaps connected to one of the criminal organizations known to operate around the docks. But they found no evidence of violence, no suspicious contacts in Liu Chun's life, and no one who had any reason to harm him. The case eventually went cold, labeled as a voluntary disappearance despite all evidence suggesting otherwise. Liu Chun's case wasn't isolated. Throughout the 1980s and early 1990s, at least a dozen dock workers vanished under similar circumstances. They finished their shifts, left through the gates, and were never seen again. Some investigations suggested involvement with human trafficking networks that operated through the port, moving people illegally across borders. Others pointed to organized crime, suggesting these men had witnessed something they shouldn't have and were eliminated. But a subset of these cases defied logical explanation. Men who had no connection to criminal activity. Workers with families and stable lives. People who, by all accounts, had no reason to vanish. And in some of these cases, witnesses reported seeing strange phenomena around the time of the disappearance. Unusual lights near the docks. Sounds of struggle where investigation revealed no signs of violence. And in at least 3 cases, other workers reported seeing the missing man days after they'd vanished, walking along the docks as if nothing was wrong, only to disappear again when approached. Witnesses who saw too much. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of these dock disappearances are the accounts from witnesses who claim to have seen what happened. Testimonies that were never officially recorded or investigated. One retired dock worker, speaking anonymously in the late 1990s, described an incident he witnessed in 1991. He was working a late shift when he heard shouting from a nearby pier. He ran toward the sound and saw 2 of his colleagues struggling with something he described as shadows that moved like people. In his account, these shadows were grappling with the men, pulling them toward the water. He called out and ran forward, but before he could reach them, the men and the shadows vanished into the water. Search teams found nothing, and the 2 men were never seen again. The witness reported this to his supervisor, but was told not to speak of it again. When he persisted, claiming his colleagues needed help, he was transferred to a different facility. He says other workers told him similar stories privately, always speaking in whispers, always afraid of being overheard. They talked of shadows that walked the docks at night, of voices calling from the water, of men who went to investigate strange sounds and never returned. Another witness, a security guard who worked at the docks in the late 1980s, reported seeing groups of people moving through restricted areas late at night. When he went to investigate, he found the areas empty, but his flashlight would illuminate strange marks on the ground, patterns that looked like many feet had walked there recently, though he'd seen no one. He reported feeling watched constantly, as if something unseen was following him during his rounds. These testimonies exist in that uncertain space between legend and truth. Official records don't acknowledge them. Police reports dismiss them as folklore or confusion. But the people who worked at these docks, people who spent years around the water, insist these stories are real. They point to the number of unsolved disappearances, the consistent patterns in witness accounts, and the fact that certain areas of the old docks were eventually closed off and demolished without clear explanation. The modern reality today, Shanghai's docks have been largely modernized. Security cameras monitor every corner. Workers carry mobile phones. The old, dark corners where people could vanish have been transformed by development and technology. The mysterious disappearances have stopped, or at least they're no longer reported with the frequency they once were. But locals who remember the old docks, people who worked there during those strange years, will tell you that some places remember. They'll point to certain waterfront areas where strange things still happen. Fog that rolls in too thick and stays too long. Sounds of splashing water when the surface is calm. And occasionally, very occasionally, people still report seeing shadows that move wrong, figures that appear and vanish without explanation. The government's official position is that the disappearances of the 1980s and 1990s were tragic but explainable. Criminal activity in an era before modern surveillance. Industrial accidents in poorly regulated facilities. People who chose to leave their lives for personal reasons we may never understand. All rational explanations for events that demand them. But ask the people who were there. Ask the workers who knew the vanished men. Ask the families who never got closure. And they'll tell you a different story. They'll tell you that Shanghai's docks have always been hungry, that the water takes what it wants, and that some disappearances have explanations that can't be written in official reports. So here we are, at the end of our journey through Shanghai's hidden darkness. We've explored haunted buildings where colonial ghosts refuse to leave. We've investigated metro stations that required paranormal intervention. And we've examined disappearances that official records can barely acknowledge. Shanghai presents itself to the world as a city of the future, a place where anything is possible, where tradition and modernity merge into something unprecedented. And that image is true, to a point. Shanghai is modern. Shanghai is forward-looking. Shanghai is one of the most dynamic cities on Earth, but Shanghai is also old. Beneath the skyscrapers and LED displays, beneath the shopping malls and subway stations, there exists another city. A city of memory and shadow. A city that remembers when the Huangpu River ran with opium and blood. A city that remembers the executions and persecutions, the violence and betrayal that marked its transformation from colonial playground to communist stronghold to capitalist engine. The haunted buildings we've discussed aren't just stories. They're monuments to the people who lived and died in them. The Wukong Mansion remembers those who chose death over persecution. The Q Mansion remembers animals caged for human entertainment. The metro stations remember whatever violence or tragedy occurred during their construction, drilling through soil that held who knows how many unmarked graves. And the disappearances at the docks? Those might be the most troubling stories of all, because they suggest that even in living memory, even in a modern city with police and investigations and official records, people can vanish without explanation. That sometimes the rational explanations don't quite fit. That sometimes there are gaps in the story that we fill with our deepest fears. Are these stories true? That's a question without a simple answer. We have testimonies from people who claim to have experienced these phenomena firsthand. We have urban legends that persist despite official denials. We have buildings that maintain haunted reputations across decades. And we have questions without satisfactory answers. What we know for certain is this: Shanghai has a complicated past. The city's rapid growth came at a cost, and that cost was often measured in human lives and suffering. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, whether you think these stories are supernatural or psychological, they tell us something important about how a city processes trauma. They tell us that some things can't be paved over or forgotten, no matter how many new buildings you construct. The shadows of old Shanghai persist. They live in buildings that should be empty but aren't. They move through metro stations where rational explanation fails. They linger at docks where the water seems just a little too dark, where the fog rolls in just a little too thick, where people who worked there for years will tell you, quietly, that something isn't quite right. So the next time you visit Shanghai, the next time you admire its gleaming skyline or marvel at its efficiency, remember that you're seeing only half the story. The other half exists in the spaces between, in the old French concession villas where lights flicker for no reason, in the metro stations where workers report things they're not supposed to discuss, in the old neighborhoods where shadows move wrong and people sometimes don't come back. Shanghai is a city of contradictions, ancient and modern, Eastern and Western, rational and inexplicable. And perhaps that's what makes these ghost stories so powerful. They remind us that no matter how advanced we become, no matter how much technology we develop, there are still things we can't explain. Still shadows we can't illuminate. Still questions without answers. But our exploration of China's dark mysteries doesn't end here. If Shanghai's colonial buildings and modern metro stations harbor such darkness, imagine what waits in cities even older, places where history stretches back, not decades or centuries, but millennia. Next time, we travel to Xi'an, the ancient capital of China, where the first emperor Qin Shi Huang lies buried beneath a massive tomb, guarded by thousands of terracotta warriors. The warriors were meant to protect the emperor in the afterlife, but some say they protect something else entirely, something that shouldn't be disturbed. We'll explore the mysterious deaths of archaeologists who excavated the tomb. We'll investigate rumors of curses that affect anyone who disturbs the emperor's rest. And we'll ask the question that no one wants to answer. What if the terracotta army isn't just guarding a tomb? What if they're keeping something in? The emperor's warriors have stood silent for over 2,000 years. But locals who live near the tomb site will tell you that sometimes, on quiet nights, they hear something else. The sound of marching feet. Thousands of soldiers moving in perfect formation. Moving underground. Moving toward something. Or moving away from it. Until next time, remember, history never truly dies. It just waits, patient and hungry, for someone to disturb its rest. Sleep well, if you can.